Welcome to a session produced by our underwriter, Janssen, the future of neuroscience R&D, patient insights driving conceptual and scientific advances. Please welcome Bill Martin, Global Therapeutic Area Head, Michelle KRAMER, Head of Early Development, Simon LOVESTONE, Global Head of Discovery and Translational Research. All three are of neuroscience at Janssen.
I want to welcome and thank you for joining us today at the masterclass focused on how patient insights are driving advances in neuroscience. I'm Bill Martin. I lead the Neuroscience Research and Development team at Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson. At Janssen, we have a long-standing commitment to neuroscience. And our legacy began in the 1950s when our namesake, Dr. Paul Janssen, developed haloperidol, which revolutionized the standard of care for people living with schizophrenia. Through our continued work, we have garnered a deep understanding of the functions of the brain and have developed more than 20 treatments for a broad range of nervous system disorders. Today, our portfolio focuses on neuropsychiatry, neurological disorders, and neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative disorders. Joining me today for our discussion are two of my colleagues, Simon LOVESTONE, Global Head of Discovery and Translational Research for the Neuroscience Therapeutic Area, and Michelle KRAMER, Head of Early Development for Neuroscience, to speak on how patient insights have impacted technology and processes that are being used in research and development. Let me set the stage. Despite advances, immense unmet need remains for patients living with brain disorders. For example, depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide, and 50 million people have dementia. Moreover, 30% of deaths worldwide in the past 20 years were from neurological disorders. It's not surprising that some of today's most devastating healthcare challenges exist within neuroscience. There's still much to uncover about neuropsychiatric, neurological, and neurodegenerative disorders due to the rich complexity and challenge in accessing the brain. These complex diseases are without a cure, and for some, there are few or no treatment options. The good news is that we've entered a golden age for neuroscience. It's an age that's driven by unmet patient needs, scientific breakthroughs, and the potential to accelerate clinical development and regulatory activities. Scientific advances in human genetics, science, biomarkers, neuroimmunology, digital therapeutics are enabling more precise target and patient identification. One of the critical components of advancing science and our R&D efforts in precision medicine is patient insight. Diseases as complex as those of the brain require an equally complex approach, centered on the unique needs, goals, and circumstances of the individual patients, as well as the loved ones who support them. Their insights deeply impact everything we do, from designing and executing clinical trial plans to developing strategies that make the patient more accessible. Today, more than ever, patients and caregivers want to take a more active role in their healthcare and are willing to share their experiences and perspectives. Simon and Michelle share more information on how patient data is being captured using scientific and technical advances, and how those data are being turned into insights. They will provide examples of how those insights are helping us create better understand diseases, to identify the patients for clinical trials, particularly when investigating therapies for diseases that are difficult to treat and diagnose. Now I'll ask Simon to join me as he shares his thoughts on how patient insights are driving advancements in neurodegenerative disorders. Simon, are you getting feedback? Or is the sound okay?
I can hear what you're saying, Bill.
Okay. So Simon, what role do you see in patient insights playing in advancing our understanding of neurodegenerative disorders and how we discover and develop our potential treatments?
Well, thank you for the question, Bill. It's a really good one. I mean, as you know, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are incredibly difficult diseases, and the journey to find effective therapies has been a very long one. I am, however, convinced that we're making progress, increasingly rapid and accelerating progress. I don't think it'll be that long before we have treatments for the diseases themselves that will slow progression and maybe even act as preventative therapies. And in the course of this long research journey, I think patient and caregiver insights are really pivotal in our ability to advance the science and discovery and development of translational treatments. But broadly speaking, I think that there are two different kinds of patient insights from patients or from carers, in fact. There are those insights that tell us what's important to patients and to carers. What is it that a therapy could do that would make their lives better? And then there are those insights that come from individual patients about their illness that help us to actually understand the disease on an individual basis and make treatments, make effective therapies. So let me give you an example of what I mean, starting with the first one. So lots of researchers and advocacy groups have asked patients and carers, family members over the years, what are the most difficult things for them? What are the symptoms that they would most like a therapy for? And the answer is incredibly consistent across all studies that I'm aware of. It's the behavioral symptoms of dementia, not the memory symptoms. It's the agitation, the anhedonia or the loss of energy, it's the sleep disturbance. It's symptoms like these that are so, to use a phrase that I don't really like, but it's these symptoms that are most burdensome to carers and obviously incredibly disturbing to patients. I know as a clinician, having seen goodness knows how many patients over the years, that for many people getting depression or psychosis as part of their dementia is the worst thing that has happened to them. And yet, the first therapies that were developed were therapies for the memory problems. These are not actually the most distressing symptoms. And what carers and patients tell us, they want therapies for the behavioral symptoms, and they want therapies for the disease itself that will be preventative or stop the disease progressing. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, the other kind of patient insight is a different sort of insight. It's the sort of insight that tells us why one patient is different from another. And actually, if you take Alzheimer's disease as a group, there are many different kinds of manifestations. So rapidly progressive, slowly progressive, with some of these symptoms that I'm talking about without affecting slightly different parts of the brain. And it might be that we could develop different therapies to these different kinds of Alzheimer's disease, and ditto that for Parkinson's disease and so on. And the kind of patient insights that will help us to do that are insights that could come from, for example, genetics, for example, from blood tests, for example, from brain scans, for example, from medical records, especially electronic medical records. And increasingly, we're beginning to use these kind of insights to tell us at a molecular level what kind of subgroup of people fall into with neurodegenerative diseases, and then to develop therapies to that subgroup. This is called precision medicine, of course, and precision medicine is already with us in cancer and other kinds of diseases. And increasingly, I think we can see evidence of that precision medicine in neurodegenerative disease.
That's really great, Simon. So if I'm hearing you correctly, rather than just define diseases by the first person who saw it, we are doing two things differently. First, we're seeking a biological understanding. And second, we're pairing that understanding with the patient insights themselves, what they tell us, and how we use both of these together to understand what is a unique population that we should be developing therapeutics for. Do I have that right?
That's exactly right. Now, over 100 years ago, of course, Alzheimer in 1907 described a person with Alzheimer's disease in the most exquisite sensitivity. And if we could have doctors that are as good and frankly had as much time as Alzheimer with every single patient, maybe we'd get there. But that's not going to work today. So that's why we need the electronic medical records. That's why we need the genetics, the biomarkers. But that's also why we need to listen to patients and their carers.
So when listening to patients and carers, how do we pull this into the design and execution of our clinical trials?
We're using these sorts of insights in lots of different ways. I think one of the most transformative advances in neurodegeneration have been the discovery of some of these biomarkers and those kind of insights, where now with a blood test even, we can tell how much of the different kinds of pathologies somebody has in their brain. That means we can target the right drug to the right patient, critically important, at the right time as well. And then by listening to patients and carers and by looking in their electronic medical records, we see some have different kinds of symptoms. And so we could have symptomatic treatments alongside the disease modification therapies that we could give just to the people that needed them when they need them.
Yeah, and in fact, if you think about, there are probably instances where when you improve the symptoms, you do alter the course of the disease.
Absolutely. Sometimes they're exactly the same thing, and sometimes they're not. And we're incorporating these kind of insights into our clinical trials so that we recruit the right people who are going to get the most benefit from our drug. We recruit them at the right stage of their disease, and we also measure the right things so we can make the most effective decisions about our clinical development. Sometimes that means early decisions to stop a program. I hope that it will also mean early decisions to get the right drug to the right patient in the clinic.
And so we have insights that we're using in a research phase and a development phase. What kinds of insights have had the biggest impact in neurodegeneration in particular?
Well, so far, I have to say that it's those insights that come, at least when we're talking about disease modification therapies, those insights that have come from molecular biomarkers. Those include molecular imaging, PET scans, and also, extraordinarily fantastic results that are coming from molecular insights from blood. However, I don't think that's the end of the story. We need more of those for different kinds of neurodegenerative diseases. But when I look forward, I think how much more information we could collect from patient insights, how they live their lives, from digital devices. We all carry in our pocket what only 10 years ago would have looked like a supercomputer. Can we use smartphones? Can we use other dedicated devices to get information about how patients are suffering with the disease, what they're doing? Can we pick up the disease even before doctors currently pick it up, and then get therapies to people and measure the effect of those therapies from those digital devices? And in Janssen, as you know, we've been doing those kind of studies with academic collaborators, with other companies, and also in our own internal studies. And I think when we look forward 5 years, those will be the next transformative step in how we do our research.
You maintain such positivity, yet surely there are challenges that you encounter. How do you, overcome these challenges?
Well, tempted just to be a bit glib and say through positivity, but it's a little bit more than that. Clearly, it has been incredibly difficult. I mean, I've worked for 15 years in trying to find a blood-based biomarker with incremental baby steps advances. Now, where we've got to through the work of largely other people, including our own biomarker team in Janssen, is extraordinary. And of course, it's all built on the work that's done before. But we have to stay positive. But also, I think some of the challenge we've faced is being solved by the technologies that we now have available that we didn't have then. We can measure more things. We no longer have to measure one thing at a time. We can measure everything. I mean, it's not quite everything, but we can measure vast amounts of things. Our computational ability is extraordinary, and most of the things that I'm describing require high compute and require analytics, including AI, both machine learning and neural networks. Simply wasn't possible to do it before. I also think by collaborative work, there's a great, we've made some of the most important steps by working in lockstep with both academics and with other companies. And also by, if you like, longevity. Companies like Janssen have been in the game throughout. We've kept amazing teams going throughout. So during the hard years, during the winter of research of neurodegeneration, our company kept going, which puts us in a very good position to capitalize on some of these advances that are now addressing the great challenges in our field.
Right. So the insights are now not just a single physician talking to a single patient, but really we can begin to aggregate multiple different types of data and then use them, pull them together, derive these insights, understand the patients better at a group and an individual level, and then understand which therapies we should develop just for them.
That's exactly right. It doesn't mean we don't pay attention to the individual patient, of course we do, but it's now supplemented with huge amounts of data, at times population level data, and that's what's enabling us to make the advances.
Yeah, I don't know, it's probably unfair to ask you of a single example of the biggest insight that you've integrated to inform our new science, but I wonder if there are one or two that you would draw upon.
Well, I think the two that are completely transformative are PET scans and blood tests. So in PET scans, we've had PET scans measuring both amyloid and tau pathology for some while, and the advances that our teams are making in Janssen are extraordinary. We're measuring now exactly the right thing, and we can tell patient-to-patient difference in how their disease is progressing. It's truly transformative. If there's anything even more transformative than that, truly transformative, it's the blood tests. I never thought we would be able to measure tau and amyloid pathology with the precision that we can in blood from people. Not only that, we can do it before the disease is fully established and clinically apparent. That changes everything. Now, there's still some steps to go. We need to make sure that we can deliver these kind of approaches on a population level basis. Possible to do for blood, never be possible with PET scans, but put the two together, we are in an extraordinary position to make real progress, and we're incorporating all of the above in our clinical trials.
So brain-based diseases that confirmed with non-invasive neuroimaging and then scale through blood-based markers that recapitulate that brain pathology.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if we can do it for the Alzheimer pathologies, who's to say we can't do it for all of the other neurodegeneration diseases?
I think that is the we have when we talk about a golden age of neuroscience. Sometimes when you're living in it, you almost have to pinch yourself. Is this really true? Are we really generating a biologically based understanding of not just the category of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, but of the subcategories informed by these patient insights?
Absolutely right. I mean, going back to Alzheimer, it was a really miraculous, wonderful description of a single patient. But it turns out when that description is applied to lots of different people, the pathologies in their brain is actually quite a mixture. And we need modern ways of getting insights from patients that will allow us to both develop and then direct therapies to the people that will most benefit from them.
So on the horizon, we're encouraged by the technological advances, our ability to see data, aggregate data that we haven't been able to before, and apply those insights.
That's right.
Well, good. So, well, Simon, I mean, this is fantastic. Thank you for sharing some of these insights on the impact of the role of patient insights in neurodegeneration. Let's now explore with Michelle how these insights are impacted by technology and processes in the context of clinical development. Michelle, welcome.
Hi, Bill. Thank you. Happy to be here.
The types of technologies that you're using now, your experience as both a clinician and developer of medicines, what's changed?
Wow, what's not changed, I think, is maybe easier. And I think building on some of the things that you were talking about with Simon, we've always wanted and had some aspect of patient perspective and people who suffer with the diseases we study. I think what's really changed is our ability to collect that and our intentionality to collect that. So the different technologies have enabled it, but I think we've now started to use it more intentionally throughout the process. And there's two really big areas. One is the collection, and Simon mentioned a number of different ways, even electronic health records absolutely help in the collection. The other is obviously the interpretation or analysis, big data, artificial intelligence, those fun words we see throughout our day-to-day as we read news. Those have really changed what we can learn from not only the things we intentionally collect and what healthcare collects, but what people who suffer from disease want to put out into their public forums. So we have such a wealth. What's not changed?
Well, that's good on the one hand, but then when there aren't a lot of things staying the same, now you have to choose ways of prioritizing. And so being able to collect the right data, generate the right insights, walk me through your thinking there and that of your team, the approach you're taking.
I was thinking the same as I was listening to Simon. It is a marvel what we're able to understand and collect these days, and absolutely picking the right things and knowing how to put them together is the critical step, as much as learning about the new technologies and new ways to collect them. And I think one of the things where it starts is maybe even pre-technology, where we really are listening differently to people who have disease and the people around them. There are advocacy organizations that we work with. There are advocates online who do leverage technology to put out their thoughts, to build community among people who suffer and their family members. And that's our first stop, is really to listen in and understand, how does that fit together with what we think we know? Of course, as you were talking about, it's from a clinician perspective, you look, you observe, you collect information, but until we really check back with the people who live day to day with the diseases we're looking to improve, we don't really understand what these things mean to them. And I think, interestingly, when Simon was giving the example, sometimes we prioritize the wrong things. I think now the intentionality is to select those things in partnership, to really hear the voices from the people who live day to day and match those up with the science that we have. Then the test is, for us, how do we assess those in our clinical trials, and how do we bring that learning into the clinical practice? And so I think there are definitely some challenges that choice, but I'd rather have more choices to make and have to really partner with people to understand than to have to go back in time and have no choices. I think it's really giving us new opportunity.
Listening to you describe that, I, I sense, and weigh in if this is not true, that we've adopted even a greater humility. And there was a time maybe when, oh, we know what's right, we're going to go do this and tell people that this is what's wrong with them. And we've completely flipped it now. Now we go to them first. We have this patient-centric view. And I think importantly, not just generate static insights, but dynamic insights that influence not just the clinical path, but also the research path, like Simon said. This is a continuum. This is not binary.
Absolutely. And it's iterative throughout the process. We constantly need to be checking back in to say, here's what we think, here's where the science takes us, how does that fit with the experience? And then we pull that even back into the clinical trials where we do have remote monitoring and different technologies that can give us, instead of someone coming into an office and having to think back, what happened over the last month or what happened over the last period of time, we can actually be collecting that data live in the person's life with them when they're in that moment. And of course, that gives every individual the opportunity to express even more personally what this disease does to them. Then we can pull that all together. But again, we have to make choices. We have to make sure that the technologies work and that they're not overburdening people who are in our studies and in the research with us. We could do a lot of things, but sometimes we've had that challenge where we put just a few too many into our programs and we've gotten that feedback from people that it's overwhelming. And then we go back and again iterate. Well, okay, let's find the most important things for us to do in this program and answer those questions first. Come back later and we can answer the others. But it is really this constant iteration of and making sure the technology is easy to use. Those are all things that we learn constantly.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, is that the power misapplied actually can be more destructive than productive. And so you've touched on some of the challenges, identify them, overcome them. What else are you doing sort of systematically to help overcome these challenges?
We have a much more rigorous process today from the beginning around understanding companies that are the experts on these new technologies. So I think as organizations, Janssen certainly doing it, others also, the way that we use these tools has become much more informed, and there is much more discipline around understanding privacy, security, how well the data can integrate into the other pieces of data. How do we train people in using these things appropriately? It's really taken us to a different level in terms of our planning. Having people in the company who are experts, knowing who to go to, and then having means to try things, to learn, to get the feedback, to go back sometimes to the drawing board, and then bring back in, but never losing that rigor. I think those are the pieces that really have enabled us to move faster over time and learn faster with the programs we have. I think our opportunity now is, how do we bring those things to life in clinical practice? How do we take what Simon described? We've brought all these exciting things into the clinical studies and research. What's the next step of bringing those to life for people who ultimately will benefit from medicines we hope to bring forward?
Yeah, so maybe let's double click on that, because you mentioned, obviously technologies, being able to shift from an observational science, medicine, to a data-driven science of medicine. Are there kind of real-world examples that you think hold the most promise, where some of the challenges have been overcome, or at least the challenges to be overcome can be identified?
Neuroscience is probably the exact right place to be doing some of this exciting work, because so much of the experience and the diagnosis and the identification of any of our diseases comes from subjective measures and experiences. That's always been critical. We've always needed it. Now we can add to that some objective measures that may actually help us predict, even before someone starts to notice that they're experiencing, for example, a relapse. And so I think for me, those are some of the exciting places for people who suffer from schizophrenia or depression. We're working to look at different sources of information. Simon mentioned the one most of us carry in our pocket. There's information that if people accept and agree to have that shared, that if we can build and look at, we can actually see symptoms start to emerge even before people realize they're emerging. And it could be as simple as how much they're using a device, or it could be other things when matched together with their overall how they're interacting with their physician or others in healthcare. Those are starting to provide some incredible pieces of information where, rather than waiting for somebody to go into a full-blown experience with horrible symptoms that incapacitate them and of course worry their families, we can get in front of that a little bit, and we can identify it, and we can work together with clinicians to check in more frequently, make sure that somebody doesn't have to slip all the way into a relapse. Those for me are really some of the earliest, most exciting things. But again, I'm with Simon on the optimism. I think those are just the cusp. We're onto some big things.
That's fantastic. So what you're really saying here is that we can shift our landscape from one where we're intervening at a sort of advanced disease stage, maybe having symptomatic improvement, but less likelihood of reversal of disease, to now maybe intercepting disease at earlier stages because of our ability to leverage insights.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, none of it would be possible, Bill, without the tight partnership we have with people who can give us their firsthand experiences.
Yeah. Well, Michelle and Simon, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts on how patient insights are positively impacting advances in neuroscience. As you've heard, these insights are important and will have an even greater impact on research and development in the future as we leverage emerging science and technologies to gather this valuable information. You know, at Janssen, we take inspiration from our J&J credo, which begins, we believe our first responsibility to the patients. That involves listening to them, understanding their unmet needs, and addressing them. We're guided by marrying patient data, scientific advances, data science, technologies, significantly understanding how these diseases and progress, lead the development of insights that will change the treatment from a diagnose and treatment to one of predict and preempt. As part of Janssen, vision of a future is a thing of the past, where extending and enhancing the quality of people's lives remains our greatest reward. True innovators never stop pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And a new era of neuroscience, precision medicine is emerging. We envision the use of digital tools and sophisticated data analytics paired with patient insights to accelerate a future of precision medicine, patients with these devastating diseases of the nervous system. We also envision a industry-wide commitment to work closely with health authorities throughout the world, forge a clear regulatory path for using real-world data, patient data insights in regulatory submissions, and to gain acceptance from regulators for the use of these devices in clinical trials. There are multiple factors that come together to change the way we research medicines. This will help us better understand, detect, and monitor brain dysfunction. will also help us find ways to prevent relapse and disease progression. It will help research develop more effective medical intervention. We believe that by integrating patient insights with scientific and technological advancements, we will one day eliminate the burden that diseases of the nervous system place on global health. And we'll do that to extend and enhance the quality of life of people throughout the world who are living with these diseases. Ultimately, we believe patient insights will pave the way to fundamentally change how brain disorders are diagnosed and treated. If we have time, let's see if we can take some questions from the audience. Okay, well, let's go to a video. Take a look at this in action.
For more than 60 years, Janssen has made far-reaching impacts in neuroscience, from revolutionizing standards of care and fighting mental health stigma to developing life-changing treatments. We've invested in critical research and development, but unmet needs remain staggering. We will continue to address this burden and human suffering, but we must not stop there. We must get in front of these tremendous needs and step up as leaders of the neuroscience revolution. We will reduce the burden and disability caused by serious neuropsychiatric, neurological, and neurodegenerative diseases, and tackle the full spectrum of nervous system disorders. At Janssen, we must never stop pushing the boundaries on what's possible. If not now, then when? And if not us, then who? Over the past 6 decades, Janssen has transformed the way brain diseases are treated. But we have the pipeline, experience, and passion to do more. To forge bold new paths ahead. To work together to uncover the full potential of the pharmacological treatment of brain disease. We will lead the neuroscience revolution.
I want to thank you for joining us today on today's masterclass focused on how patient insights are driving advances in neuroscience. We look forward to working with you to help realize the vision of precision neuroscience in the future. Thank you.